topic for today is that there is an inherent flaw in all DDoS protections. It's a bold statement to make, but it's something that we see over and over again. And we want to be able to go through and talk about today what we see is kind of the core problem. Not necessarily getting into the exact solution or anything like that, but just talking about whatever the core problem is today. There's a old saying that if you're ever in an argument with your wife about toothpaste, it's not about the toothpaste. There's some other problem going on. So, we really want to make sure that we are addressing the kind of core problem and talk about that. To do so, I'm Brian Kaye. I'm director for Americas for MazeBolt. I've asked Amit Morrison to go through and join us today. He's our VP of Services. He's got years and years and years of experience helping companies go through and solve their DDoS problem. So I think, really good choice for us to be able to go through and have some dialogue today. MazeBolt as a company, we are a company of DDoS experts with innovative technology to address what we do see as the problem. Problems lingered for decades, and MazeBolt was built to kind of solve that problem. A couple of housekeeping items for us today. If you would like to connect with either one of us, we're available on LinkedIn. Feel free to send a request. If you want to know more about MazeBolt, then more than welcome to join our website or reach out to us. We're happy to go through and talk to you about it. But we'll start off, as we dig into the problem, we'll start off with kind of what the DDoS landscape is today. In today's world, characteristics are, geopolitically based. These are well-funded organizations, new and growing botnets. Just within the last couple of weeks, there's been information out there for an 1111 botnet that is spun up. Sophisticated attacks, obviously AI empowering bad actors just as much as they're helping the defenders. But, I think that we focus a lot on some of the groups that are out there, No Name, Rippersec, some of those. For me, just as a question standpoint, a lot of times we kind of focus on the groups, but if you have a bulletproof vest, you don't care who shot the bullet. Is there some reason that we should, focus on or at least be aware of, these attack groups and some of what's going on behind the scenes there?
So we don't particularly care about specific attack groups. What we do see in general is that geopolitical turmoil around the world and in specific regions is an accelerator for this kind of activity. So if we see tensions in a specific area, of course, the war in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, so we see more attacks in those regions. A lot of those groups are very sophisticated and digging into what's actually going on. We see that a lot of these groups are state-backed. So they are backed by Russia, backed by Iran, backed by different groups or political groups, and which makes these attack groups well-funded. They have a lot of funds to spend. Some of those botnets that we see are homegrown, through malware, through different means, and some of them are bought, bought from criminal organizations that basically that's their business. So we see a lot of attacks that's coming from different sources around the world, but funded by state-sponsored actors. And we see a lot of that recently. Of course, the last 2 years, we saw a huge spikes in related attacks. Now, we need to understand that these attacks are not specifically against countries that are in the conflict, but a lot of countries around them. So if we look at specifically the war in Ukraine, all of NATO members in Europe have been attacked. The US, of course, have been attacked. Everyone who's been opinionated about it has been attacked, and we see these attacks going on for years now.
Yeah, last couple of weeks, I think Spain has kind of been the target of some of these groups. So.
Exactly.
So then I guess, because you never know when it's going to hit you. Somebody's going to go through and say something. We've got to make sure that our defenses are prepared, just in case one of these groups decides to pick on us, to pick on a particular organization, making sure that you're prepared for that.
Exactly. One of the things that we've seen, one of the main targets recently was actually Switzerland. And one of the most neutral countries in the world have been a target for attacks. Specifically, a lot of their financial systems were attacked recently. So it doesn't really matter where you stand in the conflict. If you're somewhere around it, if they'll find the connection, right? So we see that as well.
Okay. So I'll kind of move on. Obviously, a lot of headlines out there for, these guys being successful. I'll intentionally stop with last year, Microsoft was affected. So Azure and 365 was affected. I particularly called this out because they admitted that their response to the DDoS attack actually made the problem worse. I'm glad they said it. I'm glad that, they admit that and put those kind of things out there in the open. But is that something that you see with the customers that we work with or people that, we've talked to through the years that, the mitigation can create a bigger problem or cause other problems? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so we definitely see that all the time, particularly in the Microsoft case. We've been a little bit involved in understanding what's been going on, and we got some inside information of what they did, and definitely the solution they chose during wartime was not ideal. We see that with other organizations as well. Some of our customers that they make decisions during wartime, during an attack, to just stop the attack. And of course, during an attack, you are willing to sacrifice the few in order for your service to survive. Obviously, in peacetime, those are not good decisions. And what we've seen with a few customers is that those decisions impact their networks for years to come. And sometimes they find out only years later that the disruption interference that they're experiencing is because the decision that was made during wartime. And so it's very important to have visibility into what's going on in your network and say that if you made a decision during an attack and left that configuration thereafter, it may cause you problems down the road, right? What is right during an attack is not necessarily right during peacetime.
Good to think. Good to notice there.
Mm.
I will say that nobody is 100%. Let's do a quick poll question that, and as we get into some of the others, but we'll do a quick poll question that for people that have, you've gone through, you've purchased something, you get a, out of the box solution, you get that basic configuration from that day one, what do you think that your protection level is? What percentage would you say that, from a DDoS attack standpoint, are you protected? So we'll kind of have that poll on there, and I will continue to go through and talk about some of the other things because we do have some data on this as well. Wow, I see some things on there like 20%. Not necessarily happy with theirs. Looks like most of the answers that we've got are good. So there's about 33% of the people are around 60%. I will go through and say that that's close to what we find. Actually, we even find that for people that have had a mitigation solution in place for years, and they're still sitting at around 60%. Would you say that's about right, Amit?
Yeah, so on average it's 60%, but we need to understand that all the answers in this poll are correct. We've seen all of those results in many different cases with customers. So we did see customers when they start, when they do the first initial test of the mitigation, we saw customers that have 20% protection. So they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get 20% protection, meaning 8 out of 10 attacks would penetrate their defenses. Obviously, on average, it's around 60%. So you pay a big dollar amount to get only 60% of the defense, right? So that's the state of the field, as we'd say.
Yeah. So like I came from operations a long time ago. And I always used to, and I had a mentor that told me these 3 questions. And what it comes down to is that if there's ever a problem, there's an outage or something. So, we're talking about DDoS attacks here, that You have to be able to answer 3 questions before your customer, whether they're internal or external, are satisfied with the results. You got to be able to answer what happened, what'd you do to fix it, what are you doing to prevent it. So a DDoS attack, obviously, what happened? Well, we got DDoS attacked. What'd you do to fix it? We made this configuration change. Hopefully it's not. Well, they stopped after 4 hours and we were not able to stop it. But, you know, the what are you doing to prevent it is one of the hardest things to answer from this because people are already spending a lot of money with mitigation providers. They're already, they've done things to try to protect themselves. And it's like, well, that didn't work. Now what? Getting to this kind of starts to get to this core problem that we talk about. But traditionally, people have gone through and made a choice between one of 3 options. All right, well, we can switch vendors. We can add another security layer, add a feature. I would say the add in a feature is a common thing because, hey, you went down from a DDoS attack. The very vendor that's supposed to protect you is saying, oh, well, you didn't have this feature. So it's an upsell opportunity for them. And then some people will, all right, we need to do more red teaming. Maybe they weren't doing it before or they weren't doing it enough. Hey, let's do some additional red teams. All of these things have obviously some sort of cost involved with it. All of them have the capability, there's a disruption that takes place. If you're switching, if you're making changes and stuff like that, there's a disruption that's going to go through and take place. Fundamental problem is that they don't give you a lot of visibility into why it could happen or if it's likely to happen again. We are very, as an industry, very reliant on SLAs. That, oh, this particular vendor promises me a 15-minute SLA or whatever. Keeping in mind that those are how quickly a human can engage. So instead of an automated defense, it's how quickly can a human engage. I don't want to be dismissive of all of these. Somebody, it's very possible that somebody needs to switch. It's very possible that they need to add some different things. Red team testing has some advantages, but Amit, if taking just like the red team as an example, it's unlikely to find a lot of vulnerabilities. But what should someone look for if they're going through and doing that? What does it help them achieve?
So basically in a red team test, if you take a 9 hour, 2 or even 3 hours, you can test about 10, maybe 15 types of attacks against 1 or 2 targets, right? So this is all the information that you're getting. You may find a few attacks that you're vulnerable for on this particular targets, right? So if one service that you're providing is vulnerable to some type of attack, it doesn't mean that the other services will be vulnerable to the same thing and vice versa. If you find a specific service that is safe for a specific type of attack, it doesn't mean that a different service will be safe from this type of attack as well. So you're getting a very limited amount of data, but what we see usually the real result or the real value of a red team test is not understanding if you're safe or not. It's to see how your SOC teams or response teams actually respond under an attack. So can they identify the attack quickly? Can they respond quickly? How long does it take them to respond? So when you look at the red team test, the real value is understanding how your team respond and not necessarily really what's the value of the protection that you're getting. Because you're getting very little value when it comes to understanding how well you're protected, but it gives you a lot of value how your team reacts when you are under attack.
You have a good playbook.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, look, I don't go through and say that, this is lightly. I mean, DDoS protection is a complex puzzle. I refer to it as a complex puzzle. Like you could have multiple layers, which is multiple vendors. Your particular environment is dynamic. Out of the box is always kind of a bad thing, even just from a security standpoint, default configurations. Testing it requires downtime. Almost everything requires downtime if you're doing something DDoS related. It does have a fundamental need for a deep knowledge level about networking. But because it's complex in any complex environment, misconfigurations are bound to happen. It is those misconfigurations in the DDoS protections that becomes that fundamental flaw. Vendors know this. This is why there's SLAs are a big part of the sales pitch. They understand that misconfigurations are going to be there. It's, well, if someone finds one of these misconfigurations, manages to take you down, oh, our SOC team will go through and engage quickly. That's not necessarily ideal. Would you agree with that, Amit?
Yeah, definitely. When we look at the complexity of those kind of systems, it's important not just what you stop, but also where you stop it, right? So if you have a mitigation device inside your network, but your internet line was already overwhelmed and saturated, it will not help you. If you trust your WAF to protect you from DDoS, but the attack actually already kind of killed your firewall, it doesn't help you, right? So you really need to understand and calculate where you want to stop the attack. Do you want to stop them outside of your line? Do you want to stop them inside? Which kind of attacks you want to stop where, right? So it is a complex puzzle. Some of those attacks can be stopped by mitigation devices. Some can be stopped by configuring your network, your routers correctly. So it is a complex puzzle. And the main thing that a lot of companies and organizations are missing is the visibility into what's going on. Like if I'm attacked with a specific attack,
Yeah,
where, where, where and what will stop it?
right. And I know we definitely want to leave time for Q&A. So I'm probably going to skip a few things, but want to make sure that the dialogue is good. I want to make sure we do. So the misconfigurations obviously will lead to those vulnerabilities, allow the damaging DDoS attack. But in terms of what we do about it, not getting into kind of, hey, here's a guaranteed solution or anything like that. But there's an old saying out there, like if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. People challenge that, people do whatever. I think what the quote to me says is that you need to make data-driven decisions. The measuring in this quote is like, measuring gives you a piece of data. And the only way that you can dial in a particular DDoS protection is by having data that allows you to go through and do that. Um, would you kind of agree with that, Amit? That
Yeah, of course, like, right now, when we look at the numbers of attacks and the number of basically an organization can have tens, if not hundreds, of public available services, right? And we know that out there in the fields there are tens and hundreds of different types of attacks. Just imagine the amount of possibilities that there are there in ways to attack, right? So
thousands and thousands.
exactly. So if you have no knowledge of what you're vulnerable to, what kind of attack will penetrate, how can you even start improving what's going on?
Yeah. So what we advise, is that the only way to get that data and see where those misconfigurations are is that you have to be able to do more of the simulations and DDoS testing. That's got to be kind of a continual process. That's that CTEM approach of continuous. Only way you're going to make that happen is that you have to be able to go through and do DDoS simulations and testing that's non-disruptive. That gives you the ability to uncover those misconfigurations, the vulnerabilities. You can prioritize them, you can remediate them, you can validate that they were done. This is kind of what we see as the only kind of solution to that problem is to be able to go through and really find those misconfigurations and clean them up. I'll quickly allow case study where this is one of the things that MazeBolt does, working with customers to help find those things. Amit, this was a case study that, you said would be a good one for us to include here at the end.
Yeah, it's a good case study because it's really the most average customer I could find lately, right? In terms of what's their status when they start and when do we take them there. And now basically this customer they had issue of disruption. Like they give services to end customers through mobile apps, banking. They have, of course, connections to other financial markets. And basically, every couple of weeks, they would get attacked and one of their services would go down. One time it was the mobile app, another one is connection with stock exchanges and so forth. And they always experienced these disruptions. In one of the cases, their VPN was taken down and all of their employees, basically remote employees, got completely disconnected. And it basically caused chaos in the company. They reached to us and basically they just wanted this to stop, right? So
I think
we
that's
got
true with
deployed
everybody.
there.
Just make it stop.
Yeah, just make it stop, exactly. So we kind of ran tests on their system. They have 2 layers of defenses, a scrubbing center in the cloud and another solution in their own network. Basically ran hundreds of tests, found the vulnerabilities, and basically within a few pretty simple configurations of their defenses, we within less than 2 months, they went down to 14.4% vulnerability. Obviously, after that, this was like the initial activity that was done within a couple of months of deployment. Obviously, after that, a few weeks later, they even pinpointed a few other things, and we were able to take them take the vulnerability level even further. But we need to understand the main goal here. These guys were attacked. Every time they were attacked, their SOC team scrambled to try and stop these attacks. And they didn't just experience downtime and loss in business. The frustration of their team was used. They were not able to, a lot of the time they were not able to stop it. In the case of the attack of the VPN, even the guys that were supposed to stop it were not able to connect and stop the attack. We need to understand that the goal here is for all of this protection to be autonomous. And what we see here in the green is basically automatic defense of the system. You don't need to do anything. Those systems, the scrubbing center, the on-premise device, would engage automatically and stop the attack without any intervention, right? So the guys can sit at the beach, drink margaritas, while the system is defending them on their own. No SOC intervention required. And this is basically the goal. This is where customers want to be. They don't want to be in a situation where they need to call somebody and guys were under attack, do something, right? Do a manual action to stop the attack. We want the defenses that you pay for to actually do their job and engage automatically.
So I'm going to, in that, we'll continue to have some conversation here for the last few minutes, but I want to make sure that if we have a Q&A that we are addressing that. But while I go through and check that, I will go through and say that I like your analogy there, like a modern DDoS defense should allow you to go through and drink margaritas on the beach. That's I'm all in on that concept. But we started off by saying, there's, every mitigation solution has an inherent flaw. Flip side of that would be, I think you've told me this before that, look, are the mitigation providers capable of stopping DDoS attacks? Would you want to kind of, we say that there's an inherent
exactly, but we need to understand a lot of the companies that they deal with DDoS today have been in the business for a long while. These mitigation devices, almost all of them can stop almost all the attacks. They're just not configured correctly. When you take almost any technology product out of the box, it's not configured for your network. It doesn't know the sensitivity of the network. It doesn't know the sensitivity of the different services. So there are a lot of things in the network that you just need to adjust the mitigation device to your network. You cannot expect it in a lot of cases that the mitigation device will be able to stop everything automatically without making any change. And so we know, and we work obviously with all vendors, and we see that once you understand where the flaws are, where the vulnerabilities are, and make adjustments, you can get to a very, very high level of protection without buying any additional product. And in most cases, you don't need any additional product. You just need to configure the product that you have correctly in order for it to stop the attacks.
All right. So a question, what role does AI play in, I guess, enabling DDoS and mitigating? How about?
So that's interesting. And I think 3 weeks from now, we have another webinar specifically about this topic. But just to give a little taste, now we see a lot of the more sophisticated attack groups, and we talked about the sophisticated attack group previously. They employ a lot of sophisticated means basically to probe their victims before the actual attack comes. So by probing, they get a lot of information, what kind of services are running on the company. They have probes that are sophisticated enough to try and understand what kind of protection systems this company has, and basically based on these, all the information they collect through AI, they can understand which is the most efficient attack to attack those victims. And we've seen some of those attacks recently with companies that can see the probes, and then they can see that the first attack that is launched against them is a very sophisticated pinpointed attack and has the most weak point in their network, right?
Okay.
So we've seen a lot of uses of that from sophisticated group especially.
Okay. Well, we are right here at the end. Any other Q&As and stuff, anything else that's in the Q&A, I will go through and make sure that we are addressing those. If we can reach out and answer directly. We're at the end of the time. I want to be respectful of that. I will say that if you have questions about like MazeBolt's approach to it or anything like that, feel free to reach out directly to me, or you can check out our website. You can reach out to pretty much any of us here. We want to go through and make sure that people are, getting the most for it. We have a DDoS handbook. We'll go through and can provide those links and stuff like that, and it's like kind of some follow-ups. So we'll make sure we get to those. But, like I said, I appreciate everybody joining. And even though there is an inherent flaw, I guess what we learned is that every mitigation vendor out there is capable of stopping a DDoS attack if they are configured correctly. It's just a matter of finding those misconfigurations and fixing them. So I do appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you.
Yeah, true. Bye, everyone.